Good morning.
Morning, Maria. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
Hello, Maria.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me well?
Yes, everything is well. Yes.
Perfect.
Do you need any help with anything? No? All good?
Well, let me just try to share the
Screen?
screen to see whether it's really working or not. Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear that?
Yes,
Can you
we
see it?
see. We see it. Yes, and if you put it on the play mode.
Morning,
Yeah,
Guillermo.
perfect.
Hello, Amin.
Hello. Oh, yes,
Perfect.
it's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So I will stop, and you let me know when.
Yep. Definitely. Thank you.
So how were the sessions yesterday? I couldn't attend.
It was very good.
We're fine.
Very good. Everything worked well. We had an active participation. It was very well. We
It's
had
always the same people who's attending the various meetings, or?
well, this is my first time. I just joined this office, so I couldn't.
No, I
answer
mean
that question.
in these 4 days. In these 4 days, it's the same group of people.
I mean, the invitation goes to everybody. Good morning, Wenyan.
Good morning, Maria.
Good morning,
So
Wenyan.
it's the meeting participants that present during the sessions, they will attend, and observers and other participants from other days, if they want to attend the meeting, they are welcome to attend the sessions, even though they do not present.
Yeah.
And these people in the UN system who are invited to attend, is that?
UN system and NGOs also. We have
Okay.
some NGOs.
NGOs, European Commission,
UN
academia, agencies.
Let me,
I think Wenyan is here. Good morning.
morning, I mean, let me get my stuff ready. All right, so we can start. Today's day 4. This is a EGM on the priority theme of the Commission for Social Development. Thank you for coming. Yes. Yesterday, we discussed about creating employment, decent work in new and growing sectors, especially green, digital care, and then social and solidarity economy. And we also discussed the integrated policy and strategy to promote decent work and overcome inequality. The summary of the previous session, session 1 to 6, was consolidated. Thanks for the moderator and Isabel, and then circulated, to be circulated soon. So you will get the summary, draft summary. This is still very rough summary, but it's already a long document to be circulated. So you can look at in advance before the session, the last session 8. So today we are going to start session 7, the very important topic, a renewed social contract. So I would like to introduce the moderator, Ms. Wenyan Yang, Chief of Global Dialogue for Social Development Branch of the Division for Inclusive Social Development of UN-DESA. Wenyan, please take the floor. You have a floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Makiko. Thank all participants for the last 3 days. I have been following the discussions for your, it has been really interesting and enlightening. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all. And also just a very, very short introduction of the topic to give you a context of this morning's session. You see that our EGM has the title of promoting decent work, overcome inequality. The reality is that we also heard from the first session that inequality is high and rising in many places in the world, and this is causing a mistrust in public institutions, in governments, and at the international level, we also see a declining support, at least for multilateralism. So that, and you know, we are really facing multiple crises, right? So the pandemic is just the latest crisis that kind of hit us, and then we have the long running climate crisis, and in the social economic areas we have many challenges that face us. So that, you know, it's not it's not controversial to think that we need to rethink the way the relationships in our society, including the social contract that's between citizens and government. The Secretary General of the United Nations, in his report to the General Assembly, Our Common Agenda, actually highlighted the need to renew the social contract. You also know that after the Secretary General issued his report, member states of the United Nations have held consultations to discuss, basically to share their views on the proposals, the various proposals of the Secretary General. On the specific topic of renewing social contract, member states would like to have more clarification and more discussion. So this is the broader context of this morning's session. And we, the member states has this needs for for further elaboration and for clarification. So we today this session we make a effort to try to understand, to kind of go back a little bit to understand what is a social contract, what does social contract do, and where social contract, now where's the challenge, and how how and what to renew, right? So with the we are very fortunate this morning to have three really distinguished experts to share their knowledge and their expertise to provide illumination to this very important topic. So I would, you have been here for 3 days, and also you are experts. You have been in many of those virtual meetings during the pandemic. So that just I would each presenter has 7 minutes. So at the time of 6 minutes, I would appear on screen. When I give you the floor, I would mute, I would block my camera. But when I appear again, that's a signal to say that you have 1 more minute to wrap up your presentation. Okay, so just want to make this kind of housekeeping point. And also I would introduce each of the presenter when they present. So, and then as on the agenda, you see that we will have opportunity to discuss after the 3 presentations. So the first presenter is Professor Guillermo Logan, a faculty of economics and business of the University of Chile. Professor Logan, you have the mic.
Okay, thank you very much, Wen-Yang, for the invitation, the United Nations. This is a very important topic, I think, and therefore, thank you for providing us the opportunity to discuss. I will talk about, of course, the social contract, but from a very particular perspective, which has to do with a conceptual discussion concerning the stability conditions of social contracts. And the idea is, or the idea will be to identify from that perspective some ideas concerning how to improve, how to renew, and how to strengthen it. As was said in the presentation, there is no surprise if I tell you that broken social contracts are a little bit everywhere, and for diverse reasons. We have problems in Europe, in the United States. We have dimensions which are particularly important: inequality, as was mentioned by Wen-Yang, and that will be discussed later on by Mauricio. We have constitutional problems in many countries. In my own country in particular, we are in the midst of a constituent process. And the COVID also displayed some particular dimensions of the social contract which are enlightening. The paper that I provide to the conference gives some more detail concerning the history of the social contract, so I will not step into that. I will go straight to discuss that social contracts are formed by two uneven parties. One, formal institutions, and then informal institutions. And these two institutions interact one with another. Formal institutions are deliberate attempt to inhibit certain behaviors or generate margins of actions so that individuals can deploy their strategies, their life strategies, without triggering any reaction from the state. So this is a deliberate action with a rationality behind it. Some of that rationality can be a criterion of justice, as it was requested, for example, in the Rawlsian tradition, but at the most, formal institution can define what is legal, not what is really actually happening in society and what is actually fair. In particular, you can have legal behavior which is unfair, which is totally possible. An important element of formal institutions is that they evolve according to a political process. And the political process therefore, is an integral part of the social contract. But on the other side, you have informal institutions which interact with those formal institutions. These are social norms which are decentralized interaction of agents within a collective. They're not isolated within a collective, but are not imposed or designed by any authority. So what you see here is that the two components of the social contract are fundamentally different, but they are important to consider both at any time. So the approach I propose is very simple. I will basically summarize here in two principles: a principle of sufficiency and a principle of distributive justice. The principle of sufficiency says that an individual should be loyal to the social contract as long as the flow of mutual duties and rights derived from belonging to that social contract exceeds some threshold to be identified. And the other one is that each individual look at the neighbor and to what extent the flow of duties and rights that this person may obtain can or not contribute, is more or less comparable to what I obtain from the social contract and what I pay to the social contract. So these two principles interact and will give us some light on how to understand the social contract. This can be understood in the context of complete or incomplete information with time horizons that can differ, and with or without politics. So I will skip that and go straight to four applications that I discuss a little bit in the paper. One, of course, is income inequality. And income inequality is an important matter, as was said by Wen-Yang, but I would like to stress that it interacts with other elements. One thing is derived from the idea that there is incomplete information. When you look at your own path of income over time, it's not clear what is your neighbor's pattern of income. What you can easily see is your neighbor's pattern of consumption, but not necessarily your pattern of income. And therefore, there will be an interaction between the patterns of consumption with inequality. So you can have, for example, in the US, which since 1980, the income patterns for the middle class have been stagnant, but the consumption patterns have been increasing. And therefore, you can have some kind of interaction between these two things. And therefore, even though there is an important inequality increasing in the US, this can be, to some extent, subsumed by the increase in consumption. Another problem is that the sources of instability matter. It's not an equal a source of inequality which is derived from abuse or for privilege as compared to one that is more closely linked to merit. And therefore, the way the country is growing and from where the wealth created, where does it come from, is an important element of destabilization for the social contract. There are tensions between the effects of inequality and poverty, because the reduction in poverty is usually linked to very clear external signals. I presume that this is important, for example, in China, where you have an important inequality increase in the last decades, but at the same time, very significant external signals of the reduction in poverty in terms of housing, access to drinking water, sanitation, public transport, health system, etc. So these two interact and one can match the other. And the fourth element that I would like to stress in terms of inequality is that revolutions normally arise from middle classes, not from very poor people. And one of the reasons is because they have a lower cost of collective action. And the cost of collective action have been decreased because of social networks. Let me stress before I end up mentioning one point concerning social rights. The distribution of social rights is very critical for the assessment of how fair or unfair the social contract is. And this is because the particular nature of social rights, which is it's a historical, if you want, a flow of waves of rights that humanity has been increasing over time. And one very interesting thing about social rights is that from an economic point of view, this is a type of good over which there are distributive concerns. And those distributive concerns do not come from formal institutions, but they come from informal institutions. So they are very out of hand of public policy. So I would like to say this. This is an important. The distribution of social rights is very critical in explaining the insatisfaction with the social contract. I discussed the inequality of burdens. We can talk about this later on. I discussed segregation and discrimination, but my time is over, so I stop here. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. I think there's so much information and knowledge that's contained in the presentation. I do look forward to further discussion. Our next presenter is going to be Dr. Mauricio Busolo, who is the chief economist for South Asia of the World Bank, and Dr. Busolo, you have the floor. Take us.
I think you are muted. Could you unmute the microphone?
Yes, yes, I am unmuted now, right? You can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is a good discussion with many different point of view. So thank you for the invitation. My presentation is based on a work that we completed pre-pandemic, so it's not super recent, but a lot of the points that I make are still valid, or even more valid after the pandemic. It's also focused on one part of the world, which is Europe and Central Asia. So this work that we did basically makes starts from the same perspective that was discussed in the introduction, that the globalization, technological change, and we can add aging have created opportunities, but also cleavages within society. And we make 4 contribution to link these cleavages with the social contract. The first one is that the nature of inequality, although there is a lot of talk about increasing inequality, and indeed in some countries there is an increasing inequality, it's not it's not so, when you look further, it's not so obvious that in all the countries there is an increase in standard views of inequality, but there is a strong increase of tensions between groups. So we show that it's important to look at disparities among groups and inequality of opportunities to understand the changes that people go through and move beyond just looking at income. Guillermo mentioned consumption, obviously, but looking also at how insecurity and risks are not shared equally. The second point that we make is that, okay, especially for Europe, which invented the welfare state, and so it's supposed to have a good set of institutions to take care of inequality. Actually, because the inequality have changed nature, these institutions are not so well and still effective in reducing these new forms of inequality. So that's the second contribution that we make. And the third contribution is that there is still quite a bit of demand for equality, for equity. And indeed, when you ask people about what they think the inequality situation is, everybody tends to be fairly preoccupied, and they want corrective actions. So, so when you put these together, you have a problem because there is not equilibrium, and so you need to think of how to redesign a social contract. Let me. I will probably not have much time, but we have some principle of how to maybe redesign this social contract. And one last point I want to make is when we talk about the social contract, as Guillermo was saying, it involves many different actors, and you can't really talk about a policy to renew the social contract. It's really a discussion of the legitimacy of what is going on in a society. So it's a fairly radical concept. Okay, so this is basically what we have in the narrative of our work, and I will give you now some examples of these various parts of the narrative. Before doing that, we use a kind of restricted view of the social contract. It overlaps with what Guillermo was saying, and we think of the social contract as economists mainly as a dynamic equilibrium between three parts. Part one is whatever happens in the market, it generates a certain distribution of resources. This distribution is then corrected by actions of the government, and by distribution you don't have just to think about income distribution, but you can also think of distribution of education, distribution of health, social services, etc. So the government provides education and therefore corrects this distribution. And the third element is that this demand for equity that comes from the society, and that is a result of what Guillermo was calling informal institution, etc., etc. So. So basically, this is our view of the social contract: a balance between whatever happens in the market in terms of distribution, whatever is corrected by the policy, whatever is then the demand for equity. One example of each, perhaps super quickly. I have mentioned, I'm starting with the market, and I have mentioned that what we emphasize is that it's important to look at horizontal inequality, and you can think of very different groups. We emphasize three generations: birth cohort, workers, and regions. But you can also think of migrants versus natives. You can think of women versus men. All of these are relevant in the social contract discussions. I don't have time to go through the details. And then last, what we look into, which is technically a similar thing to the horizontal inequality is inequality of opportunity. You can have a very low level of inequality of income, but you can have a fraction of that inequality that is really due to certain things that are beyond the control of people. So that's what inequality of opportunity measures. If all the inequality that is in a society depends on the gender, and there is, among women, there is no inequality, among men, there is no inequality, and all the inequalities between men and women, that is a type of inequality that is considered completely unfair. And so even if the inequality is low, it's really unfair. And so that's important to consider. Okay, so one example of what happens in the market. Here you have the incidence of non-standard employment for two groups of countries and by age group. So these lines connect different cohorts that were born in different years, and it shows you that in Southern Europe there is and in Western Europe there is a little bit of an increase in this incidence of non-standard employment, but not so much. What is really striking is the incidence that is affecting the young generation, the blue line. So there is a big difference of the incidence, and that creates tension between groups. I have 1 minute probably, so I will rush like a mad. The public policy I mentioned, they don't work anymore. I have an example here that exacerbate instead of reducing the inequality, exacerbate the inequality between age groups. And then I have a very nice example, and I'll stop there. But that's my last example of what happens from the perspective of the demand for inequality. Here we have a data that asks people about where they think they are in the distribution. They are in the side 1, 2, 3, or 4, and this line shows what people say. It's a function that we estimate what are the probability of saying that they are in the first two poorest groups. And as you can see, it's a downward sloping. So the richest, there are still some rich in the side 10, or thinking to be rich in the side 10, that they think they are poor. But what I want you to look at is this second line, and the difference is that these two lines are actually the people have the same income, but for the blue line is people that generate their income not through full employment or constant employment. And everybody believes that they are more poor, even if they are on the same decile. And that belief is equivalent of basically three decile of consumption less. So it's insecurity is equivalent to a very big jump in resources. I have to stop there. My last slide was on the principle of redesign the social contract, which are basically universality, security, and delinking from the type of employment, and tax, which we don't talk enough, but we should talk more. I stop there. Thank you for your patience with my overflow. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Busolo. This is a really very interesting material that you presented, and that I'm sure that we'll have interesting discussions following. We have our next presenter. We have the former Prime Minister of Belgium, Mr. Yves Leterme, who will share with us institutional mechanisms and distribution of responsibilities for renewed social contract. Prime Minister, I trust with your experience in government, and you will bring a a very practical experience and perspective to today's discussion. You have the mic, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here on behalf of Club de Madrid. I was the Prime Minister of Belgium, which is one of these countries, rare countries, that managed to weather crises, financial crisis and recent crisis, without damaging the Gini coefficient. So with societies that stayed equal as they were. We at Club de Madrid, we have a project since 15 years. It's called Shared Societies, and for us, a shared society is one in which all individuals have a common sense of belonging and responsibility. And we believe that striving to build shared societies is really critical in the success of democracies, economies, and citizens' well-being. COVID-19 has, of course, been a significant shock to the implementation of the Agenda 2030, since it had made existing gaps and new gaps in social development particularly tangible. And this, of course, is a situation which is more particularly difficult for some minorities, minorities affecting their prospects for a healthy, prosperous, and sustainable future. If you look back at any kind of crisis, in fact, there are always two things you see. First, you never come back after a crisis. You never come back to what was before the crisis, the so-called normal. There's always a new normal coming out of the crisis. And second, the crisis strengthens the existence of tendencies both on the positive and negative side. So at Club de Madrid, let's say, take the right lessons from the COVID crisis, we have convened what we call the Global Commission on Democracy and Emergencies, bringing together former heads of state and government with specialists and with people representing multilateral and civil society organizations, just to focus on how well this kind of crisis, like the COVID-19 crisis, affects inclusiveness and affects democracies. We come out with 20 recommendations. You can find them on our website. These recommendations are actually along three pillars of democratic resilience. First one, the mechanisms and institutional aspects of democracies and fundamental rights. Number two, social inclusion. And number three, recommendations related to effective leadership and democratic culture. The first pillar on mechanisms of democracies and fundamental rights we find essential to strengthen institutional resilience in the future and capacity to deal with crisis through creating flexible rules of procedure, contingency plans, and the use of digital technologies, for instance, as part of the institutional normal mode of functioning. Other example, it is key to protect checks and balances, fundamental rights, and the rule of law through strengthening constitutional safeguards, guaranteeing effective parliamentary and judicial oversight, and ensuring open government. Second pillar on social inclusion and emergency response, we recommend to adopt, as examples, we recommend to adopt an equity-based approach to emergency response, ensuring, of course, that it meets more particularly the needs of vulnerable minorities. But to come back to refer to the earlier to the former speaker, this will also mean social inclusion and emergency response. This will also mean to finance emergency response through progressive and effective fiscal frameworks, not only on labor, also on capital, keeping an effective tax collection and fighting against corruption. In addition, for us, it is key to build universal social protection and healthcare systems, adopting contributional and rights-based schemes, ensuring the equitable and appropriate quality of care, and also making a so-called global fund for social protection to combine international support with domestic resource mobilization, which will help middle and low-income countries to reach rights-based social protection schemes. So these are two examples on the second pillar, social inclusion. Last but not least, we also came up with recommendations in terms of effective leadership and democratic culture. Our reflections concluded, and the exchanges concluded, that although it sounds obvious, it might sound obvious, it is still needed to invest more in preparedness of leaders in all circumstances to act, to address challenges, to address crises in times of uncertainty. These leaders must lead with facts and decisiveness, having a clear hierarchy of objectives and priorities, and be in close cooperation, close coordination with parliament, opposition parties, and social actors, just because of the need of this inclusion. And of course, leaders have to communicate with truth and empathy, and to build strong partnerships, open civic space, and foster responsible citizenship. Let me conclude by pointing at the report by the UN Secretary General on Common Agenda Report, where we very much support its call for the organization of a World Social Summit in 2025 to revisit the social contract for more inclusive, equitable, and resilient societies. We think that the World Social Summit in 2025 could prompt a renewed global commitment to sustainable development goals in the final years of the Agenda 2030, would offer space to initiate discussions over the post-2030 development framework and boost progress in areas such as social protection, healthcare, housing, education, and decent work. And it would also be an excellent opportunity for member states to reflect on the renewal of their own national social contracts, and for the UN to strengthen its framework for effective social development. To really conclude, last February, we convened an online session with civil society groups to discuss the path to the World Social Summit. We produced a concluding statement available on our website also, and of which I would like to share two reflections. Number one, World Social Summit is an opportunity for shared decision-making. If voices from civil society organizations, including the voice of minority, particularly those of the Global South, are heard along all stages of the summit. Secondly, it is also an opportunity for agenda setting. The World Social Summit should build upon clear objectives regarding what should be achieved, and for that we believe the process needs to be human-centered and make sure it contributes to the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much for having us in this discussion, and looking forward to further exchanges. Thank you. I hope it's within the time limit.
Yes, Prime Minister, you actually still have 48 seconds. So you...
Not good either.
Yeah, you are very good, very good. Very good leader, very good time manager. I thank you very much for sharing your personal insights, as well as the wisdom, the collective wisdom of the Club de Madrid. Indeed, our division had the honor and experience collaborating with Club de Madrid on many occasions, especially in supporting the work of the Commission for Social Development. So I also want to thank you and your organization for that. And now the next segment on our agenda is discussion. We have interactive dialogue and discussion. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 discussants. I would go asking each discussant to really focus their discussion, try to manage their comments in 2 to 3 minutes. And then I also want to encourage all participants to join the discussion. And one way we can do this is by using the chat function to type questions, either a general question to all or to a specific presenter. So that will be the next part. So now going into the interactive discussion segment. First, we have the Chief Executive of the Tax Justice Network, Mr. Alec Coben.
Thank you.
Yes.
I mean, really 3 interesting presentations, and I would want to echo very much what Dr. Busolo said. Tax is the thing. We actually know, we have tax identified as the primary means of implementation for the SDGs in Goal 17.1. But I think we often think of that only in revenue terms. The 4 R's of tax: revenue, redistribution, repricing of things like tobacco or carbon emissions, and the 4th R, the one we tend to overlook, political representation. The share of tax in government spending is one of the only things that's consistently associated with stronger political representation, better governance, reduced corruption, governments that are more responsive. So when we have tax systems that work, they don't just have more revenue to spend, they spend it better. And we see that in things like when health systems are more funded by tax, they tend to be more inclusive and get better outcomes, even for the same amount of money. So that tax is the grit in the oyster. Nobody likes paying it, but and politicians have short-term incentives to limit it. But medium and long term, it's tax that drives that social contract. And direct taxes in particular, the evidence is pretty clear. The more salient taxes on income, profits, wealth, the ones we dislike more, in a sense, are the ones that really drive it. But lower income households tend to pay both the highest share of their incomes in tax and the lowest share in direct tax. And that means they're not just facing greater economic inequalities, they face political inequalities. They don't have the same sense of tax citizenship that higher income households do. And so we need to think about how we include lower income households, which of course are disproportionately headed by and include women, indigenous peoples, people living with disabilities, and so on. People who are already subject to overlapping inequalities are further marginalized by the way the tax system treats them. Internationally, and I'll finish with this point, if states are the duty bearers for these rights and need to deliver tax systems that are progressive, the problems at the international level are very substantial. We know that, we have cross-border tax abuse costing, in our estimate, $483 billion, $500 billion a year, due to abuse by multinationals and individuals hiding their assets and income streams. The biggest losses are suffered by high-income countries, but the biggest losses as a share of tax revenues and a share of public expenditures are suffered by lower income countries and are caused by the OECD member countries and their dependent territories. Of course, the same countries that set those rules that give rise to those outcomes, those global inequalities in taxing rights. The way we go through this, consistent with delivering on the SDGs and that 17.1 as the primary means of implementation, is through a UN tax convention to set an intergovernmental tax body under UN auspices so that all countries have a vote and a voice in how those tax rules are set. Now, the Economic Commission for Africa's ministerial conference, more than 50 UN members, more than a quarter of the UN's members, have just called for the UN to begin negotiations on that sort of tax convention. The OECD members can see the OECD's latest corporate tax proposals are not going to deliver. So the global measure that's going to take us, that is the key building block to embed a stronger social contract around the world, is to move ahead now with that UN tax convention. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, because I think that what you just said is highly relevant, and also I like your call for UN convention is places great trust and responsibility on the UN. I do hope that some progress can be made when it comes to tax matters, and I know that we have experts group that work on tax global cooperation on tax matters, right? So and also with the initiatives of OECD, and hopefully the time is right for some international action on that front and to support the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Paola Simonetti, who is the director of Equality Department, International Trade Union Confederation. Paola, you have the mic.
Thank you, Wenyang, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to intervene in this important discussion. A great presentation. So I would just touch upon key issues that we from the International Trade Union Movement, we think are the ingredients, so to speak, for the new social contract, which we actually very much welcomed because we were actually already demanding, the implementation of a new social contract from as a trade union demand. And we say that this new social contract should be actually rooted on the SDGs, and especially on SDG 8, which is of full employment and decent work, because it has all the multidimensional nature that can actually bring forward and gain traction overall on the 2030 agenda. And what are the keys that are reflected in the new social contract, and then again on SDG 8, is of course the job agenda, the job creation. This is for us central to the new social contract. So we talk about the creation of climate-friendly jobs with just transition and social dialogue. So think about it, was mentioned by previous speakers before, the climate, the green economy, but also very much the care economy has a great potential for job creation, for employment, for women re-entering the labor market after the terrible impact they had on the with the crisis. The ILO has actually estimated millions of jobs, and also the UN Secretary General potential on the within the care economy. So this is for us, the job creation is of course a pillar based on rights. Of course, we want decent jobs to be created with minimum living wages. So wages is also something that is fundamental when talking about fighting inequality that was brought about by previous speakers. I would like also to stress the importance of implementing universal social protection system. And this was also recalled by one of the previous speakers. We want to see universal social protection systems everywhere, and because these are really like a factor of resilience of countries, also economic resilience. And we would like to see also, and we back up very much the global social protection, the global fund of social protection, because not all the countries have the means to put in place those systems. So we need to support the least developed countries in actually putting in place social protection systems that can actually help the people and their and the workers. So of course, equality is also a major issue, and it's central in our key and demands for the new social contract, and equality and inclusion. And finally, I'll stop here. Would like to back up also the proposal for the for the 2025 summit to replace equality and inclusion amongst the key issues to be put on the agenda, because they are very much linked with our common agenda. And last but not least, the accelerator on job and social protection. It's a key element, it's a key tool actually to foster all these demands that we have in the new social contract. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. This is truly very, very important perspective that you shared. And also thank you for the support, strong support for the social summit. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Matthias Thons, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. Let's hear the employer's perspective. You have the floor.
Thank you, Wenyan. In fact, it is not Matthias Thons, my colleague, IOE Deputy Secretary General, but it is Maria Paz Ansorregui. I am the Director for ILO Coordination in the International Organization of Employers, and I'm delighted to join you in this important session, in this important conversation. So I think I would like to start by agreeing with many of the voices that made clear today that despite the unprecedented opportunities and innovations that have emerged as technological developments create new avenues for economic growth, that we have to recognize the current climate of economic uncertainty, the increasing geopolitical tensions, and energy insecurity that is creating an overall worrying state of play these days. And on top of that, we see that states face major budgetary challenges, and in particular, with regards to ensuring adequate financing of social protection systems. And I think we have to say, and we have to bring to the debate, on top of everything that has been said, I think it's important to reflect on the economic dimension of the social contract, of the new social contract. And I would like to pose and perhaps refer to the fact that one of the things that the pandemic has shown to the world is how important the private tech sector, SMEs, and supply chains are to create productive employment and decent work opportunities for all. And in that regard, we need to recognize that conducive environment for sustainable business are not an aim, but the basis for employment, for jobs, for growth, for innovation, for opportunities, and for development. And I would like to, on every now and then, I like to recall the former UN Secretary General quote that refers to that it is the absence of the broad-based business activity and not its presence that condemns much of humanity to suffering. And I think it is in this spirit that we need to approach the discussion of a new social contract as we move towards the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And in that respect, I believe that the building blocks of a new social contract should also consider and take into account and comprise the need to respect the rule of law, the right to property, free market, democratic institutions, and good governance, as they remain fundamental to a renewal of any social contract. Harnessing the productive potential of free markets is absolutely essential to building social capital. It is essential for inclusion and livelihoods, not only to finance public goods, but also to find solutions to developmental challenge and obstacles to sustainable economic development. And I think I would like to conclude by making a reference to, and I think an authoritative voice in this debate when it comes to the new social contract, and that is Minouche Shafik, the director of the London School of Economics, as she makes a point in her proposal to increase productivity and to grow the pie through the investment in productive market forces, including capabilities of people, business environment, green transition, and digitalization. And most interesting, I think, she argues for fostering fair competition and rethinking competition for the digital economy as a strategy, as a way forward, and as a necessary component of building blocks for a new social contract. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, and we're very happy that you joined us. Thank you for your presentation and your insights as well. Next on the program, we have Ms. Sarah Renner, who is a consultant on sports for development and peace at UNDP. Sarah, are you there? Sarah?
Banyan, I think Sarah couldn't make it today.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So okay, then let's go to our next discussant, who that is Isabel. Isabel is a colleague in the Division for Inclusive Social Development. Isabel, please.
Thank you so much, Banyan. Thank you everyone for these fantastic presentations. It's such a broad range of issues that are being covered. I think I just want to add to that broadness. Following a literature review of the various publications on the social contract, I would just like to highlight certain elements that came out of this review. I think a first one is that of the importance of a definition. There's a lot that's been written about the social contract, but it's often left undefined, and this limits the concept's relevance when it comes to practical action. It's often noted that social contract establishes how power is exercised, how resources are distributed, how we organize things that need to be delivered collectively, such as childcare, education, healthcare, but also risks linked to aging and unemployment and disability. And it poses the question of where does responsibility lie for these collective services, whether it's with the family, the local community, the state, or the private sector. And I think here we can see differences between developing countries where often the family does have an important role in providing some of these services and support, whereas in more advanced economies, the state and the private sector tend to step in. A second element I would like to raise is that of what is the purpose of a social contract. Here also there are various elements that are put forward. I think, should the overall arching goal be that of achieving social justice or realize human rights, or should it, or I've also come across a more utilitarian approach where citizens voluntarily consent to limiting their freedoms to obtain the benefits of political order. A third element, which I think is worth noting, is that, and I think it was mentioned today, is that a social contract is dynamic, and that a resilient national social contract, which is this agreement between state and society, needs to be able to adapt to changing economic, social, and political realities. A fourth element, and I think this was touched upon by Professor Larin, is how culture and value influence the way the social contract is framed. And he mentioned that this was indeed this distinction between formal and informal, so social norms, and how these impact how social contracts may be different from one country to another based on these social norms. I think social contracts and taxation, which also comes up quite often in the literature, and we have an excellent presentation here today, so I don't want to dwell on that, but this appears to be a crucial aspect, like how we can finance these things and how we can make sure that we can prioritize progressive tax systems and expenditures in order to build fairer societies. One interesting element that also came up in this review is, do external international forces shape national social contracts? So for instance, the financing divide is limiting the ability of many developing countries now to invest in sustainable and inclusive recovery. And these developing countries rely then on international solidarity to finance key elements of their national social contract. And a final point is that the link between social contract and the concept of trust and perceived fairness, and I think this also came up, this notion of perceived fairness, and the fact that trust in institutions and this perceived fairness is often a prerequisite for a social contract to be to work and to be sustainable. So these are just a few elements. Thank you so much for allowing me to contribute to this discussion today.
Thank you, Isabel, for this very good kind of recap to pull the different elements and from all the presentations. I think indeed, I personally feel that this has been a very rich and very enriching discussion and presentations. I don't see I don't see any comments in the through the chat function, and I don't see any hands. While I invite all participants to to share their thoughts, or to, if they have any comment to any of the presentations, or if they have any questions to any of the presenters, or to just throw out for discussion, I want to take advantage of my role as a moderator to ask to make a comment and invite and make a question to invite all to share their insights. I think that it's very clear that from the different perspectives and from the different presentations, that a social contract, one of the important function or role of a social contract is to help citizens to handle risks and uncertainty, which are inevitable elements of life, right? And one of the ways to do this is through a universal social protection program, right? But of course, to actually do it, we need money to finance the various programs. Where do money come from? Tax. Okay, and that's fine. But there, when it comes to tax, there's also fairness, as Alex has shared with us. There's fairness, there's legitimacy, and there is representation, political representation associated with the taxation. And I have a specific question that kind of puzzles me, not just today, but for a while, even the previous 3 days. That is, we know, I think, for a people-centered approach to social contract or to sustainable development, we must pay particular attention to disadvantaged social groups who face various challenges, some of which come from environment and elements, structural elements that's beyond their personal control, and some of it are because of their specific conditions, such as a person with disability or a young person born into a socioeconomic environment where opportunities are more limited for them. For those, for the disadvantaged social groups, inevitably they end up being more working in informal sectors where there's very limited, if any, social protection at all, or they are in formal or informal jobs where they actually earn low wages compared to the better educated and better off workers. So that for them to be part of the social protection schemes, and typically they need to contribute to say unemployment insurance or various social insurance programs, because they are earning, even though low, but they are they are working, they are earning low wages, and so they are not receiving social assistance, right? So for this group of people who are kind of, somebody had used the image of a donut to kind of illustrate their challenges. They are like the donut hole. They are too better off, if I can use the words, to receive social assistance. Yet they are not better off enough so that the contribution to social protection schemes doesn't present a burden, financial burden to them. So for this, how do we, I want all presenters and discussants to share their views from their perspective. How do we mobilize resources to support this group of people who are at the risk of being left out of the system, and what kind of from both from equity and fairness perspective, what would be a practical solution that can help those people at the same time is viewed as fair and equitable. So the floor is open that anybody, any of the discussants and the presenters, if you want to react. Thank you. I see one chat. Okay, I'm trying to also mind the chat box. Okay, I see somebody posted a comment, but if
you want, Wen-Yang,
yeah, go ahead.
I can jump in and comment some of the elements that have been discussed.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. Very, very good insights from all from my fellow speakers, but also from your comments. Let me stress one of three elements that were mentioned. We need to understand better, I think, the the problem of corruption and trust. This was mentioned by Isabel, but was mentioned also by Yves. We need to discuss this well, because the problem with corruption is that it affects on the public sector side the set ruler, and therefore it really has an implication for the rest of society, to what extent other people is obtaining unfairly more benefits than the rest. So attacking corruption and jumping over corruption is totally critical. And how to do that? Of course, there is a problem of justice, the tribunals, but it's not enough that, because what you often see in many countries in which there is a kind of backlash against corrupt people or corrupt agencies, is that people initially, their reaction is that they worsen their trust. They lose trust even more. I mean, we saw that in Latin America now, with this very large corruption case linked to a Brazilian construction company that basically bribed everyone in many countries. The initial reaction of the people is to have higher distrust. So trust building is something that we need really to address in a much more systematic way, as was mentioned by Isabel, I think. Another point I would like to discuss has to do with climate change. When I was young, I used to think that life in the planet would be forever. So in my own planning, I had, if you want, I knew that at some point I would die, but the planet would go on, and my offsprings would continue living in about the same planet. The fact that today we're talking about a kind of existential threat to the planet itself changes dramatically let me put it in this very economistic language, the optimal behavior of people. And very weird behavioral patterns appear when you pass from an infinite horizon scheme to a finite horizon scheme. So we need to be very aware that the climate change problem may be stressing social contracts in very unexpected ways. So therefore, this is another argument for stressing this point. Now, on Paula Simonetti, Paula, I believe she's right in asking for full employment, and then on universal systems. I believe we all agree on that. But we should recognize that there is a tension between these two things. There is a tension in developed countries, and there is also tension in less developed countries. And therefore, working with that tension is an essential part for a healthy discussion on these very important points. And one final thing concerning the role of the private sector. I don't believe that social contracts can be fixed only thinking that the state will solve all problems. We need to involve the private sector, but the private sector is not just markets. When in my book, when I talk about social rights, I think that we need to consider the private sector in a very large conception of private sector. There are firms, which of course that they will play a role in some point, but NGOs and non-profit organizations are very important. And the question that you mentioned, Wen-Yang, in how can you mobilize resources? I believe that there is a lot of very motivated people, people that move they move resources by purpose that can be used in a very significant way to help in fixing social contracts. So tax, yes, but we need to address also to mobilize those resources which in a more spontaneous way will mobilize if we give them space to do it.
Thank you. Thank you for your intervention. I think those are very, very important elements. And I have 3 hands. I'll give the mic to Professor Busolo, and then we'll go to Prime Minister and then Paula.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to make 2 quick points. The first one is on universal social protection that seems to be agreed fairly universally, and connect that to the point that you made, Wen-Yang, on the fact that there's a group, informal workers, that are outside of the current social protection schemes. But basically, what my colleagues in social protection at the World Bank did, they produced a very interesting study about this, which goes by the name white paper or something. But the main issue is one of design. It's the fact that most social protection systems are designed to get contributions from standard employment contracts or schemes, and so there is no clear way of collecting and delivering social protection, collecting contribution, delivering social protection from the informal. But the second point that they make is that the informal sector is not uniform. So it's not just there is a formal sector and there is an informal sector. The informal sector is extremely heterogeneous. And so there are people who can contribute, there are people who can be therefore covered by the standard one. It's just a matter of making them, enrolling them in some form of contribution. There are people that are not so able to maybe contribute regularly, but they could have a different packet of services. And there are the people that are really poor that deserve social assistance, so they want to make contribution, and that will come from general taxation. So it's a problem more of design and knowing better what is the informal sector. So it's feasible. The second point that I want to make, and I give you just a quick. Again, I want to share one slide. This is from Piketty on the 2019 presidential lecture. So what I want you to notice, these are top rate taxation, the tax that is for the richest from 1900 to 2010. So notice one thing, the US, when they won the war with the UK and others, the Second World War, as a condition for the Marshall Plan, they asked Germany to increase their tax rate, and the U.S. was and you see the green Germany top tax rate after 1940 goes from 60 to 80 or 90 even. So this is possible, has been done, and this is associated with a period of amazing growth in Europe and in the world. So we are somehow extremely shy when it comes to taxation, and we are all slave to, the capital will go away. Capital won't go away from the US if it's taxed more. There's a lot of other things that attract capital. So this is a big discussion, I understand, but we are way too shy when it comes to taxation. Thank you. Those are my 2 points.
Thank you, Mauricio. I call you professor. I know you work at the World Bank. In China, professors are highly respected people. So you show your respect.
I like the title, no problem. I do some teaching anyway. So thank you.
Okay. Yes. Prime Minister, you have the mic.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, 3 points related directly or indirectly to your point about informal workers. I think it's another example of, let's say, good arguments we have to ask for convening a World Social Summit. It's the kind of as the kind of key elements that could be discussed, just like concepts like universal social protection and the Global Fund for Social Protection. What is in it? What does it mean exactly? I can tell you in our working party on the impact of COVID-19 on democracy and on inclusion. It was a very rich discussion, but where we saw, given the fact that we had people from all continents taking part in the conversation, that conceptual also things tend to differ, and so I think that the World Social Summit could help us making progress in that field. Secondly, in our discussion, it was very clear that access to the universal social protection or to the fund that would, global fund that would help to finance this universal social protection, that would be subject to conditionality. Conditionality starting from the fact that social security schemes and social rights are still organized at the national level, that of course there should be, in terms of legitimacy, there should be, for instance, some thinking about conditionality in the field of domestic resource mobilization, of fight against corruption, of effective tax collection. So it's, but of course, this is also the kind of thinking that could be on the table in the World Social Summit. Last but not least, I carefully took note again of the plaidoyer, the people, well, the presenters pleading for tax. Okay, and there's for instance, a very important breakthrough in terms of corporate tax, the minimum tariff for corporate tax under the impulse of the OECD. That's good, but it's not such an easy way. I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of hurdles before you're able to implement this. I don't know if you witnessed this week, even at the level of the European Union, where you would think such proposals and the implementation can be agreed quite fluently and easily. Well, there's again a blocking since this week, because one of the member states has opposed its veto towards this uniform corporate tax rate. So it's the way to solve the issue, but it's not easy. There's a lot of hurdles to be taken. Yeah. Just 3 remarks.
Thank you so much for your very, very clear points, and also I really appreciate the real politique perspective and aspect that you bring into the discussion. Yes, ideals, they must be implemented, right? So we have to find ways to implement. Yes, I also recognize that we are actually eating into our break time. We are supposed to have 10 minutes break between 2 sessions. So if I can ask Paula and Guillermo to be brief in your remarks, and then we would give participants the very much needed break. Paula.
Thank you. I will be telegraphic. Just one point about the coverage. Of course, we have the recommendation of the ILO on the social protection floor, which is really the basis, for the, when we talk about, the coverage of, this kind of categories of people. And also, I would like also to remind that, when it comes to the financial, coverage of this potential global fund for social protection, we hear many comments sometimes that it's not financially viable. But if we think that only 0.69% of official development assistance is going, to support social protection, we realize that how much, is we need to be changed. So it's a question also of political will in how much, the countries, the donor countries, can actually support this kind of schemes that will be so crucial for the countries that are less developed to, develop their own universal social protection, systems in that sense. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Guillermo.
Yes, Manuela Tomei is asking about distributive justice. I would like just to mention that when you look at the Gini coefficients, pre and post action of the state, taxes and expenditures, it's very impressive to see that Gini coefficients of very developed and egalitarian countries, I will talk about Germany, for example, compared to Chile. Chile is very unequal, Germany is very equal, is very egalitarian, so to speak. But the pre-market, the pre-action of the state Gini coefficients are very similar between the two countries. So they're not very different. So the whole difference is made out of the action of the state. And therefore, in terms of distributive justice, and if I understand well Manuela's point, I think we need to enhance the capacities of the state to raise taxes and to expend it in a very efficient way on the distribution side. And the welfare state in terms of universal social rights, I think, is probably the where we should focus our attention. How to do well that job that should help significantly to improve our situation.
Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge there's a question in the chat function about whose responsibility it is to finance education, especially in view of changing technology. You know, people need to learn through their lifetime, not just for the first 20-some years in their life. So that's a question that I'm afraid we don't have time to answer, but I just want to acknowledge that question and for people to reflect on. And now we come to the end of our discussion. I want to thank everybody for your contribution, presenters, discussants, and other participants. As representing the UN, and we champion decent conditions of work. So I don't want people to feel that they have to jump right into the next session without a break. So yeah, with Makiko's agreement, we can give people still 10 minutes of a break and resume 10 minutes later. So that's saying that we'll start the next session in 10 minutes. Makiko, is
yes,
that?
I think it's a good idea. Also, we just distributed the policy recommendation, so maybe 10 minutes so you can have a chance to look at the policy recommendation, which not including, of course, the current social contract session. It was too, we don't have time, but we reflect that one in the later stage. So
okay,
then
so we reconvene at 10:30. Yes.
10:30. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I hope people can take a break. We will want to start the session, last session on policy recommendation. Just 1 second. Yes. I hope everybody's back. Jean is here. Yes. And then a couple of moderators is here. Okay, great. All right. So I hope you, I know it's a short time, but I hope you had the chance to look at the policy recommendation. At this moment, it's still the draft. And we would like to have your comment, anything which was missing or to revise. There's some issues, key issues to address, but more focus on policy recommendations. So I would like to invite some of the moderator who is here to have some coming from their sessions. Who is here? Moderator, I think Christina is here, no? Would you like to say some word?
Yes, yeah, I'm happy to say some words. It's a bit jumping into the middle because I will be talking about session 3.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, let me just quickly find my notes. Sorry. And so this was the session about policies and regulations to address the vulnerabilities of those engaged in informal and precarious forms of employment. And let me maybe just highlight 3 points which I think came out of the discussion quite clearly. One part of the discussion was the question about effective policies and regulations to address the vulnerabilities of those engaged in informal and precarious work. And I think there was quite a lot of agreement among those who were present in the session that we need a comprehensive policy approach that encompasses both the policies that address the kind of income distribution as well as redistribution. So both policies, such as labor market policies or wage policies, but also obviously social protection policies and tax policies. And I think in that context, and also seeing how the world of work changes, I think another point that came out clearly was that kind of flexibility and security are not contradictions, but it's really kind of two sides of the same coin. So if we have flexibility without adequate labor and social protection, that will reduce in exploitation and is neither equitable nor sustainable. So in order to achieve decent and productive employment, we actually need to be sure that there are also these adequate protection mechanisms which are in place. The second point I would like to make is with regard to the role of government, or how can governments effectively facilitate the transition from the formal to the informal economy, and that was a big part of our discussion. And I think there was a very strong emphasis on really understanding the diversity of informal employment along the lines of gender, along the lines of age, and really see how policies that can effectively extend labor and social protection to those who are currently uncovered need to follow a nuanced and integrated approach that is in line with ILO Recommendation 204. And I think formalization is not an objective in itself, but it's really about a transformative process that ensures decent and productive employment for workers in all types of employment, including self-employed workers, but also contributes to economic development and to sustainable enterprises, and is really critical for greater fiscal and institutional capacities, and also in a way a reinvigorated social contract. And then the third point I would like to highlight is on universal social protection systems that include both social insurance and non-contributory, which usually would be tax financed schemes that can secure at a minimum access to healthcare and income security, and are really adapted to today's realities. And I think this combination of different mechanisms, depending on the country context, I think this is a very, very important point, because I think only in that combination of the contributory and non-contributory mechanisms, we can have actually risk pools which are really large enough to be sustainable and to be equitable. And I think one big question in that regard, and I think this is a challenge which is present for many countries, is really on how to ensure that those coverage mechanisms are also inclusive of self-employed workers, and not only on a voluntary basis based on kind of individual savings, but really being included in the system itself. And obviously also other categories of workers who are currently not yet included. So I think these 3 points, I just wanted to highlight those because I think this is really resonates quite a lot also with the discussion of this meeting, and also of the question about how a reinvigorated social contract could look like. So thanks a lot, and handing over back to you, Makiko.
Thank you, Kristen. Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm sorry. I just want to invite Paula. I'm not sure Sharon is not here, but do you want to summarize the first session, or Paula?
Yeah, I think that I can briefly go through the policy recommendation, maybe. Yeah, is that
Yeah.
okay with you?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, just a point.
So
point,
just key points. So the need for integrated policy responses to respond the impacts of multiple crises on the world of work. And then integrated national employment and social protection strategies to accelerate a human-centered recovery from COVID-19. So it was again underlined the issue of investing in decent and job creation. Again, the universal social protection system, universal access to essential services, to quality health and education. It was made a reference to adjusting to the macroeconomic policy to address inflationary and debt sustainability pressures, addressing multidimensional gender disparity and needs for young people in terms of decent work. And then again, promoting the implementation of the UN Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection. And then I would say promoting, of course, sustainable financing strategies for the policies that we have just went through. Therefore, progressive taxation, anti-evasion measures, strengthened development cooperation, debt relief, special drawing rights reallocation, direct funding support, and business accountability. These are the main issues. Sorry, I wasn't really prepared. I was just skimming through the recommendations.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. That was from session 1. Manuela, you are here. Would you like to say a key message or at this point or not? Oh, Manuela is not here. Okay, so for the sake of time, I think most of the things.
Sorry, Makiko, I'm here. Sorry.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I can say a few words. Well, first of all, I think that the session indeed agreed on the fact that unequal access to employment and decent work is both a cause and a consequence of inequalities, not only in labor markets but also in other spheres of society, and that inequality of access to decent work is very much linked to where people work and who they are. Recognition that indeed inequalities along gender, age, ethnic, disability lines have been exacerbated by COVID-19. And that also workers in informal employment and in precarious formal jobs have been hit, and that very often we see a disproportionate amount of women and disadvantaged groups in both informal and employment and precarious formal jobs. So in terms of what are the possible solutions moving forward, well, the importance of moving beyond short-term, patchy and piecemeal measures, and include interventions that really address what are the root causes of inequality and vulnerability. And through an intersectional lens, the key areas of interventions were identified in increasing investments in the care economy, because this, and also making it clear that it does not means only investing in expanding the social infrastructure, but also improving working conditions of care workers, among whom women prevail. This would generate more jobs, better jobs, especially for women, and would also facilitate participation in the labor market of workers with family responsibility. Another big piece of the puzzle would be accelerating transitions to formality. It goes without saying that this involves a series of macroeconomic trade tax policies that would influence structural transformation, productivity gains, and business development. But we also need to devise distinct pathways for the different segments of the informal economy in charting a pathway to formality, while also working on how to prevent the informalization of formal jobs. Third main lever would be, as it has been mentioned by many, universal, adequate, and gender responsive social protection for all. I mean, to include also the self-employed, who definitely are prevalent in the informal economy. Highlighting also the social protection is not only essential to provide for income security in the face of life contingencies, but also can help address systemic barriers in the labor market. But redistribution alone is not enough. I think this is a point which was raised also by Christina. We need also to improve distribution within the labor market. So it means acting towards improving wages and working time and other working conditions, while at the same time contribute to effectively eliminating discriminatory barriers, systemic barriers that keep standing in the way of women and other disadvantaged groups. And last but not least, the issue of voice and representation. This was something that came up over and over again. It's voice and representation for those who are in the informal economy and in formal precarious jobs, but also how to ensure that associations representing people with disabilities, youth, women, can indeed join in shaping policy interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. Since the last session of the moderator is not here, Isabel, can you just give very, very short, very key point? Is Isabel here?
Yes, I'm here, Mikiko.
Okay. If not, we can.
Yes, thank you. So on session 5 on creating employment and decent work in new and growing sectors, presentations focused on various aspects, including green jobs and how this green transition could create up to 1 million new jobs within the EU. Solidarity is an integral part of this European Green Deal. The care economy is also addressed as an important area for work creation, which needs greater emphasis in policy making than it has received until recently. There was also a discussion about women's labour force participation and how this can still be improved, and there's still a way to go. The ILO estimated 300 million new jobs could be created worldwide, even though 84% of them were likely to be informal in the field of the care economy. I think it was just there was a discussion about cooperatives. I'm sorry, Mikiko, I just haven't had a lot of time to go through all the policy recommendations.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So maybe we can, yeah, because due to the time, maybe they can read. Okay, thank you so much. So I think at this moment, because participants can just do just a recap. Thank you so much. We'd like to make a more like interactive dialogue for comments and contribution, feedback. So first, I'd like to invite Jean, the chairperson of the NGO Committee for Social Development.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kiko. As a representative of civil society, I am here on behalf of my colleagues of the NGO Committee, to amplify, the voices of people who live with the challenges of poverty, joblessness, homelessness, and hunger. These are the people who have been and continue to be left behind as we move towards achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the people who have struggled with severe economic impacts of the coronavirus. We support much of what has been offered as policy strategies over the last few days, and indeed thank the experts for their research and recommendations. We are practitioners who present the following recommendations as critical to achieving employment that protects human dignity and provides access to adequate standards of living and is supported by universal social protections. This in turn reduces inequalities exacerbated by a COVID-19 pandemic for people who live in poverty, who are jobless or homeless and hungry as we are here today. So our first recommendation is that people living in poverty and seeking employment should be viewed as actors and not beneficiaries. Their voices and ideas must be sought and heard. While civil society creates some opportunity for social dialogue, the government and private sector must increase these opportunities. All policies and programs need to be inclusive, people-centered, and gender-sensitive. All policies and programs, as was stated in the 1994 ILO Declaration of Philadelphia, labor is not a commodity. All human beings, irrespective of race, creed, or sex, have the right to pursue both their material well-being and their spiritual development in conditions of freedom and dignity, of economic security and equal opportunity. Many faith traditions teach that the person does not exist for the work, but the work exists for the person. Decent work is critical for upholding human dignity and securing social inclusion, the well-being of family, as well as societal stability. The priority theme and focuses on full employment and decent work, achieving SDG 8 and 10. But informal employment and family caregiving are left out of the definition of decent work. The ILO estimates that nearly 2 billion people earn their living in informal and precarious work, and this represents more than 61% of the global workforce. Member states must recognize the skills and talents of the informal and care workers, their contribution to the national economic agenda. States must pave a pathway towards universal social protection systems and floors, ILO Recommendation 202, to ensure that all people, the unemployed, informal workers, or care workers, have access to unemployment assurance, social security, basic income, education, healthcare, and housing, protecting their dignity and stabilizing families where there's a crisis, such as environmental disasters, armed conflicts, and pandemics. We urge member states to recognize the heterogeneity of informal employment and to initiate policies, including protection measures, to move towards inclusive and formal employment, ensuring human rights and the dignity of every person, while nuancing policies to address a wide range of vulnerabilities and settings, not only in employment statuses, but in the intersections of gender and age. We recommend investment in inclusive labor education tailored to the needs of today's labor market, focusing on training and upskilling, especially targeted for women, older persons, the homeless population, and youth. This will necessarily include digital training and reducing the digital divide. Access to the internet is a basic human right, and many today clearly are excluded. Indeed, it is apparent that 1/5 of young people worldwide are classified as NEET, not in employment, education, or training. With access to education and training disrupted and fewer jobs available, we risk wasting this precious resource, our youth. Member states can develop professional schools which offer progressive integration into working life. These schools can also assist women, persons with disabilities, persons experiencing homelessness, and older persons who have suffered with the labour market challenges brought about by the pandemic. We need to invest in human capabilities and provide these job seekers with opportunities to engage in lifelong learning and to acquire digital skills in line with labour market needs. A human-centred recovery and structural transformation requires the integration of three main elements: formalisation of employment, the green jobs for people and for the environment, recognition and value of care work, and skill development and retraining to meet of the new jobs that will be created. Finally, financing for development is more critical now than ever. Developing countries are struggling with COVID-19, chaos in the international economy, and severe global inflation, rising food prices, forcing starvation and food insecurity for millions. These are the concerns that developing nations can manage in full cooperation and collaboration with regional and international entities. The United Nations can and must focus on financing initiatives to help the millions of people in these nations. Member states must be accountable for good governance, multi-sectoral and multilateral approaches to poverty eradication, full employment and universal social protections, as well as accountability for all their commitments. A global fund for social development must move beyond an idea to a reality, and it can be a reality with official development assistance, increased international cooperation on taxation and contributions from international financial institutions. Only then can member states truly say they reached out to those furthest left behind. In conclusion, as representatives of civil society, we are actually optimistic in our approach to the future. On the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, member states agreed that our challenges are interconnected across borders and all other divides. These challenges can only be addressed by an equally interconnected response through reinvigorated multilateralism and the United Nations encouraging and collaboration of efforts. We believe, as was stated in Copenhagen Summit for Social Development in 1995, that we must continue to place people at the center of development and direct our economies to meet human needs more effectively, to fulfill our responsibility for present and future generations by ensuring equity among generations and protecting the integrity and sustainable use of the environment.
Thank you.
Kiko. I think I've gone over my time, but thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Maybe you can submit, could you send that the message to us, and also your contribution to add something, review the policy recommendation from your perspective, and add some comment would be appreciated. Thank you so much, Jean. I'd like to open the floor. There's some chat going on. And also I would like to point out the last session we didn't capture in the policy recommendation. We had a very, very good discussion on the social contract. So I just want to know if Wen-Yang, Guillermo, Mauricio, Alex, who also Maria of IOE, who would like to say something to recommend or included key message.
Absolutely, if I may, Makiko, and I was just trying to insert that in the chat box. I review also very quickly the recommendations, and I was a bit surprised that there is absolutely no reference to the key role of the private sector as a source for full and productive employment creation and, creation of decent work opportunities. So in that regard, I also pasted the link to the Ilo Centenary Declaration, tripartitely agreed and adopted by the International Labour Conference in 2019, because I think that can be an important source as we reflect on the way forward. And in that important document, there is a very clear reference to the role of the private sector And I'm going to quote it, hold on, because I was having, and in fact, it recognizes supporting the role of the private sector as a principal source of economic growth and job creation by promoting an enabling environment for entrepreneurship and sustainable enterprises, in particular, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, as well as cooperatives. And there was also a reference to cooperatives in the chat. But I see that there is some reference to only cooperatives in the draft policy recommendations, and the social and solidarity economy in order to generate decent work, productive employment, and improve living standards for all. So perhaps an invitation to the Secretariat to also have a look to this important and I would say very powerful document that has the support and agreement of workers, employers, and governments in the context of the ILO. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. We discussed about the role of SMEs, but you're right. But these are employers' perspectives lacking. So your comment and the key recommendation is very much welcome. So if you
thank you very much. Happy to provide all of that in writing.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Makiko, can I was also trying to write in the chat box. I think first of all, I think Isabel had kind of captured the key elements of that session. If I may, just to kind of come back to this question about responsibility and financing for education, and education being so important, right? So I was writing in the box, if I may. I think that education is a key element in the social contract. Remember in the discussion, the social contract, the pillars of social contract, mechanism of democracy, and to help citizens to address risk and uncertainty, and also to ensure social justice and so on and so forth. And then we all know that education is one of the avenues through which better I should say more equal outcomes can be achieved. And also I think that the right to education and equal access to education is a very important component of a social contract, where people get the sense of justice and equality in society. So in that, and also as an economist, I can't help by thinking that the benefits of education, typically when we talk about who pays for what, right? We analyze the benefit. Who benefits? Then it's fair for the beneficiaries to shoulder the cost. So who benefits from education? For obviously individuals, we become better educated and we can get better paying jobs and all that. Therefore, private contribution to the cost of education is a very important element. At the same time, education also has societal benefits. That's what we call externalities, that goes beyond the individual, him or herself. That better educated workforce are more productive, and society where the people have better access to education are more tend to be more equal and less poverty and all that. That brings societal benefits, better social cohesion and political stability, so on and so forth. And that, as I mentioned, that right to education and equality in opportunities is a very important component of a social contract. I think governments, the state, bears a primary responsibility in providing social education and training to promote better, more inclusive societies. At the same time, I'm so glad that Maria mentioned the private sector. The private sector is also a beneficiary of a better educated workforce, right? And especially in view of fast technological change, the needs for lifelong learning and almost continuous upgrading of skills becomes very important. And to private enterprise, I think this aspect is also very important. And that's why I think the private sector also has a very important role to play in provision, especially in terms of the skill upgrading and so on and so forth. Then of course, Maria, your point about private sector being the creator of employment and so forth, that's very, very well noted. It's also related to this. If I may say, this is my personal argument that for the private sector also to be a partner in the provision of education and training and share the responsibility as well as the financial cost. So that would be my my kind of reaction to the question, and I will stop here. And I see there are others who want to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. That's a very important point. And Guillermo hasn't raised hand, so yes, Guillermo, come on in.
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Wen-Yan has just said. Just would like to add two things. One is that it's true that the externality that was mentioned by Wen-Yang exists, but it probably is stronger in the early phases of education, and the private component is more stronger at the in the latest part of education, in particular in the continuous training phase at the end of the life cycle, so to speak. So you should normally have more stronger financing from the state in the early stages, and more on the private sector in the latest components. But one thing which is important to say is that education is one good, so to speak, in which asymmetries are so large that a proper regulatory framework, even for the private sector to jump in and provide educational services, is very important. So even though if the state is not necessarily the one that will finance education in the latest stages of the life cycle, it's important a proper regulatory environment, and therefore the government has a role in that respect anyway. So that was my first point. And the second, I would like to stress something that I already mentioned, and to some extent it was in some of the comments by Roger, I think, that we need to take advantage of vocations. I'm not sure how do we say this in English, but many people with vocations to do things, for example, educate disadvantaged groups or disabled people. Normally you have people with some specific spontaneous vocation for that, and they belong to the private sector. They are organized in associations and in cooperatives and stuff like that, and using those resources is extremely critical. It's cheaper, I think, from the perspective from the state, and it can be very effective because of this vocation that all these people normally have.
Thank you, Guillermo. Yes, I was thinking also, like, I'm from Japan, so traditionally Japan, the companies actually provide all the training, vocational training, but that is when the lifelong employment is there. But now lifelong employment is kind of disagreed, not so much of the guarantee, but I think that, coming for digital age, I think it's maybe kind of partnership. It's like a private, public-private partnership, not only national level, but the local level, like a regional government or mayor, local government, because they want to create their economic growth in that regional or the cities, big cities. So maybe that may be a good idea. Anyway, so I'd like to also invite Roger and also Alex, because Alex Kohan talk about the tax, because this taxation things is quite important. But who comes up? Roger, would you like to have some comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, picking up on what Guillermo just said, I think the socialist and solidarity economy has an important role to play, particularly for disadvantaged people and people missed out by, the formal systems. They are close through their communities and through their bottom-up organizations to these disadvantaged groups and people. They can do something themselves to kind of help them move forward. They can channel them into the formal systems, and they also have a role to play in providing some form of social protection through microfinance and credit unions, which helps people. They play a role in supporting social justice, for example, through fair trade organizations, which are generally in the social economy. So I think there's a range of ways in which they are particularly important for the informal sector, and maybe making a bridge to the formal sector and formal provision. So thank you very much for the opportunity to say that.
Thank you, Roger. The Silke is raising hand. Silke Stab, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry I'm coming late to this. I missed the session on the social contract, but I wanted to come back to this issue and apologize if I'm saying things that may have already come up in the conversation yesterday. But I think the recommendations now include a lot of really good content on the what of the social contract, especially on the economic and social policies that are needed. But a social contract is as much about the how as it is about the what. And I think it is as much about politics as it is about economic and social policies. And so I think it would be really important, especially I think since this report can give some more substance and meat and vision to the Secretary General's call for a new social contract, to have a strong call for a new politics around constructing this new social contract as well. In the past, social contracts were a lot about figuring out the relationship between states and markets, between workers and employers. That remains really, really important, but it's just as important to bring in groups that were often left out and marginalized from these social contracts and that are increasingly making their voices heard. So I'm thinking about organizations of informal workers, I'm thinking about women's rights organizations, racial justice organizations, indigenous rights organizations, and so on, and make sure that these groups are able to co-shape the new social contract that we're envisioning. So I think as part of the recommendations, it would be really good to have a strong one that is about kind of participation and accountability in kind of shaping the contours of this new social contract, which will be quite context specific, right, for every country. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I like the word co-shaping. It is process is very important. So it's not so much of what, but the process to creating, you have to, all the stakeholder has to be included so that they have the ownership towards them. Okay, Alex, would you like to come in?
Thanks. I mean, look, I'd follow that point up by kind of going back to something I was saying on the 4 R's of tax and how that builds, in particular, representation builds the social contract. Every group that Silke has just mentioned, we know are disproportionately represented among lower income households. We also know those households in almost every country of the world in every period pay the highest share of their income in tax, but have a lower sense of tax citizenship because they're paying it in indirect taxes that are less salient, whereas the high-income households are paying a lower overall share of their income, but a higher share of that is in direct taxes that makes them feel that they've got a stake in government in a different way. So I think, Silke's point about co-production and involvement in creating the contract is absolutely right. But we can also think about that broader context, not just looking to involve particular groups at particular moments, but what is it in terms of the design of the tax system that can deliver more consistent engagement, that gives tax citizenship to people in lower income households as well as higher income households across the board, because that will have a disproportionately beneficial effect in reducing the overlapping inequalities that those people face. So it's about thinking how we tax those households directly. So bringing informal sector workers who are often paying very high informal taxes instead into direct taxes, not because we necessarily think formalization itself is a terribly great goal, but because it will empower them politically. And we've got case study after case study of how that works, particularly with women traders in Accra, for example. It's a key measure. Giving people the right to be formally taxed allows them to resist lots of other things and engages them politically in the design of taxation, in the provision of public services, whether they're inclusive or not. And then just going back to that global point, we know direct taxes everywhere are weaker than they should be. There's a race to the bottom and taxes are ineffective, especially for the high income households and bigger companies. Until we fix the international tax rules in a globally inclusive way, lower income countries will continue to suffer disproportionately losses in terms of tax revenues as a share of their current public expenditures, with all of the impacts on inequalities that has within countries. So the UN Tax Convention has kind of a key measure of commitment towards fixing those international rules, re-empowering the scope for progressive taxation at the national level. I would hope is something that we'd want to support.
Thank you so much, Alex. This taxation issue is very, very important. Yet, as Prime Minister said, the implementation part is, but then there should be the way to mobilize, as you said, co-creation and the number of people and groups should be included in this conversation. Oh, okay. Anyway, is there any Manuela or Maria Fornera, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. I would like just to elaborate further on what has been said with regard to the social contract. I fully agree with Silke that it is very important to ensure that the content of the social contract, the new rules of the game, are somehow defined jointly with all those that need to be at the table. At the same time, the credibility and legitimacy of any social contract, any contract in general, is very much dependent upon the actual respect or delivery against what was promised or commitments in the contract itself. So I'm also thinking about what type of, besides the what and besides the how, is indeed the implementation, but also some form or some type of monitoring mechanism that may enhance the accountability of all those that subscribe that contract. I cannot be more specific than that, but I think these are all very important pieces that underpin the legitimacy and the relevance of any social contract.
Thank you, Manuela. I couldn't agree more. Is Maria Maria, would you like to come in?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Makiko. I wasn't expecting to be making any comments today, but I enjoyed the session very much. And I'd just like to say, since Minouche Shafik was mentioned, that what we should remember, and I think that Jean Quinn, the chair of our committee, said it so well, what we should remember is that the social contract is based on what we owe to each other. And that's my main point. And I think that whether you are powerful or not, we all owe something to each other. And that's the way that we can live together towards the future. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This social contract, we just begin the conversation. I think we should continue discussing it and then also mobilizing the more people inside, included more people into this conversation. Is there any other, unless you have any other comment at this moment? There's somebody raised hand.
Makiko, it's me again.
Oh, okay,
if I may. If I may, yeah, no, just to on the various point, but I would like also to touch upon the point of the accountability in terms of the contract parties in that sense, because I mean, one thing that of course, it's a major, I mean, it's really the how to, to implement the social contract demands. It's equally important. So the how to for us, it's really about social dialogue. So really to have social dialogue supported by governments and by social partners, representative organizations, so by representative organization of workers and employers. And it's a fundamental part when really it comes to the overall governance of the new social contract. Certainly for what concerned the SDGs and SDG 8 implementation. So in that sense, what we always call and we advocate about an inclusive governance, new model of governance, we see social dialogue as a central piece to that. And in that sense, I mean, from our perspective, we cannot talk about a new social contract if we don't really tackle also the governance, so the how to, and who should be, the player in this respect. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think Guillermo raised hand, and then also I didn't see that, but Rodrigo has some comments. So if Rodrigo is still there, would you like to come in first? Guillermo first.
Yeah, one thing concerning this, what the social contract is, I just put on the chat that you have these two components, and the problem is that the social norms are quite out of reach from traditional policies, and not only that is that by the very nature of social norms, is very hard, and I would say it can be even threatening for democracy if governments try to be really harsh on affecting social norms, because you need to get into people's minds, and that's very difficult. So how to address this issue, I think, is something that will have to be really understood much better. We don't have a very clear sense of how to affect that part of the social contract. We know what to do with traditional public policies, but on this side and the challenges and tensions arising from democratic values, I think it must be something to think about as well.
Yeah, the how-to part is the one that really, so maybe later on we can learn more how this social dialogue could be expanded, and then including more people, or we talk about more, we give a thought. Rodrigo, Rodrigo from ECLAC, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Makiko. Thank you all for the very interesting conversation about this issue. I agree with most of the things that have been said. I only would add that it's an issue to see who and how are who puts the rules of the discussion in the agreement, and this is the way that we decide who is participating, as Silke has raised very interesting. So the rules and the way that the discussion goes forward is part of the problem whenever you don't see some people that think that is really owner of the discussion. If we want everyone to think that they are part and really owner of the result, the discussion about who puts the rules maybe is part of the point. Secondly, I send a message regarding the issue of institutional frameworks and to strengthening. In Latin America, at least, we have a big issue on that. If we want to go forward with better quality of social protection system, we need to discuss more on institutional issues and to rise a better participation and more transparent kind of policies. And this is not only related within countries, because as COVID-19 has pointed very clearly, the issues that we have do not see frontiers from countries. So we have problems that are abroad from that. And lastly, to say, as we have mentioned some different moments, as inequality is inefficient. So maybe it's a good point to move some of the willingness to find solutions is to discuss about the cost of doing nothing. It's not just to have finance to solve problems. It's also to analyze which is the cost of not solving the problem. So we are paying a lot on that. We are paying directly in terms of productivity and social cohesion. It's part of this, but also we are paying this in corruption, as has been raised before, and also on instability and the issues of insecurity in many of our countries. So maybe we could add some of those elements for the discussion too. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And I think we are coming very close to the ending, unless you have any more.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I think that Rodrigo raised quite an important point in the sense that COVID and now more recently the fallout of the Ukraine war, etc., has indeed exposed even further the interdependence among countries, among people, and inequalities among countries that have been following a trend of slow decline have been picking up back. So when we are talking of this new social contract, certainly the national dimension has a very important role, and it requires some sort of specific and country tailored type of approaches. But what about also a sort of more global global contract? So this is a sort of first reflection. The second reflection concerns the cost of doing nothing, the cost of inequality. I think there has been quite a lot of literature about that. We are not lacking sort of arguments and evidence supporting the negative implications from a social, productivity, political viewpoint. But I don't know whether those arguments and those evidences are not conveyed to the right people in the right manner. So what is missing? Because as I said, the evidence is there. So what would be required in order to make a sort of more convincing plea for indeed addressing inequality in a sort of decisive manner? Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. Yes, it's a social contract in a global level is also addressed by, I think, at the last session. It's not enough for national level, but because international lack of social contract per se is also affecting at the national level. So I think that was also good dimensions to raise. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, just another point. By looking at the exchanges in the chat box, I think something that perhaps we have not dealt with to the extent required, but it's quite a difficult topic. It's a complex topic, is the whole issue of the interrelation among different sets of policies that can help and contribute to reducing inequalities. Because indeed, sometimes well-intentioned measures may have unintended consequences. So to what extent are we indeed sufficiently equipped to embrace a sort of integrated lens towards, policies or strategies to address inequalities by being very sort of open and honest in terms of pointing to what might be potential trade-offs or also complementarities, only if indeed, this different set of policies that very often are established by different parts of government and all the other actors, non-government actors that have a very important role to play in their implementation are not really, looking at them through this perspective. Do we have the tools to do that? Is there an appetite to do that? Is it making things more complicated, or would that indeed help in terms of advancing the discussion?
Yeah, that is a very important point, because if it's too much like some kind of raising voice without involving, it become like a threat to some member states or some. It is the gradual process. I think it's at this moment we just start a conversation to define what is social. First of all, we have to know what is a social contract, but many people in the world doesn't really understand what is social contract, especially this is more Western concept. So first we have to kind of dissect what is it and so and so, but process is very important. But then we need to have how to do it. But then it is also policy. I think policy, Silke was saying that the policy also matters. For example, gender equality, it was advocacy is important, but the policy and then regulations, tax and everything is, so it should be more integrated in a whole sectoral approach. It should be, because otherwise, and everybody should be involved in this discussion, because anybody who is left out, it's not good for this, because it's a whole, everybody is involved. So it was a very interesting discussion, and I think we have to continue this discussion further because we have a time, and unless you have a burning questions or comment, I think we are going to end, and then we will create another conversation like this. Thank you so much for your contributions, and as I said, I distributed the draft policy recommendations and key issues addressed, so you are all invited to provide a written comment, but in track change, please track change, and then sending back to us so that we can incorporate all the additional comments, and then send a revised version again to all the participants. So you have still chance to further improve the document. Thank you so much. So I would like to give the floor to Wenyan for the concluding comment. Wenyan, please, you have a floor.
Thank you, Makiko. Thank you, colleagues and friends. I must say that the past 4 days have been really very, very interesting, and I have learned a lot. I would not make any kind of effort at summarizing, even just to give the highlights. I think I'm still in my head, lots of things are still being digested. So I just want to add my thanks to all participants for your contribution and for your generosity to share your insights and your expertise with us. As Makiko says, this is the beginning of a dialogue, a conversation, just as we were talking about the social contract. It's an inclusive dialogue. It's a process. So is this process of supporting member states to further advance social development, and just between us, hopefully to organize a social summit that can to provide further guidance and opportunity to discuss important issues and to face the challenges right in front of us, and to advance this idea of well, I wouldn't say advance the idea of a social contract, but really kind of examine realistically, you know, the social contract and how it can be improved, and to make sure that development will benefit all, and our society will be more peaceful and more coherent. And I think that Manuela, you mentioned some really very important issues, and I think that it's definitely food for thought. And then we, as I thank all participants for your contribution, I also want to give you a warning that the conclusion of this meeting is not the end. Of us reaching out to you for to benefit from your expertise. There will be follow-ups and continuation, more than just you sending back the comments for the conclusions. About the conclusions, the policy recommendations, I just want to say that we will do our very best to incorporate your suggestions and comments, but at the same time, we also hope that you can understand sometimes due to various limitations, including how long the documents can be practical, you know, in terms of really highlighting things without losing focus. So some of your comments, if not reflected, I right here, I beg your understanding and support. And also, if there are certain points you have, let's just say reservations, I just want to appeal to you to think about, is this something that you really cannot agree to, and this is like a deal breaker for you, and it really, you know, contradicts certain things that had been discussed in the meeting, then do bring to our attention. But if it's something you say, oh, I have my reservations, or it should be further clarified, or that, but I can live with it, and then we just hope that you would bear with us to you know, to kind of agree to the recommendations. With that, I want to once again thank you all very sincerely for your contribution. And as I said, we'll continue this engagement and dialogue. And don't be surprised that we reach out to you again. And it's in the US, it's a holiday weekend coming up. In Europe, I know it's already late. So I want to wish everybody a good day, good evening, and we look forward to our partnership and continued collaboration to actually do something that's meaningful, and that's I think, you know, part of the United Nations efforts to promote inclusive, sustainable development that will benefit all people everywhere in the world. So I thank you, and I bid you good afternoon or good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei-Yan. And thank you so much for all the participants. And then also I express my appreciation for ILO for their, you know, very close collaboration organizing this, and also Regional Commission, ECLAC, and all the participants. And also I would like to thank my team, that Isabel, Maria Guran, and Jessica, who was, you know, working so hard to prepare prepare and organize, and still all working hard to summarize on all these things. So thank you so much. So with this, we are going to, Guillermo raise hands, or it was from the, no? Okay, so all right, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll see you soon. Bye.
Okay. Also thank Amin for his technical expertise.
Sorry, Amin, I forgot. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Amin.
Yeah.
You're still here. Amin, thank you so
Yeah.
much. And he's also doing all this posting and website managing,
Right.
managing all the EGM site. And so thank you so much. And then thank you for your contribution, sharing links and everything. We all post on the EGM website. So
Thank you.
visit.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.